1. All right. Well, it's the 4th of effing July, and on a grand scale of China to Leonard Skinner, how many Freedom Eagles are you feeling right now? Personally, I'm feeling 0 Freedom Eagles this 4th of July, Anno Domini 2024, in spite of the fact that the algorithm has been pushing this egregious, semi-ironic, but not really Independence Day propaganda straight at me. So if you're listening to the audio, just think like NASCAR, Lockheed Martin, and the red, white, and blue with like some sports games, some games of sports ball being played. But this is what I'm getting hit with all day. And so since I'm not really celebrating the 4th, we're going to just take this moment to witness what many people around the country are doing together.
Got 3 things to say. God bless our troops. God bless America. And gentlemen, start your engine!
You believe in miracles? Yeah! And when the band plays Hail to the Chief, they point the cannon at you.
All right, that's enough of that. But I really love how like jingoistic fascists can't really understand like art in any way. It just seems to me like Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival is an anti-war Vietnam backlash song. And, you know, Keep Rocking in the Free World by Neil Young was, which, you know, what Secretary of State Anthony Blinken recently performed at a bar in Kiev, Ukraine, is actually an indictment of the cruelty and dysfunction of American society. And like the lyrics of those songs aren't really up for interpretation. They mean explicitly what they say, but what are you going to do? These people have drank the Kool-Aid so hard that no amount of cognitive dissonance seems to bother them. So welcome to Colonial Outcasts, an anti-imperialist podcast that your uncle will hate. My name is Greg Stoker. I'm joined by co-host Mark Wayne, and we've got an alternative 4th of July episode for you today. Also, real quick, annoying plug. We're trying to, in a few years' time, build this into a whole media platform. If you would like to support us in that endeavor, and get access to a lot of awesome and extra subversive content, as well as perks like a live Q&A every week, consider checking us out on Patreon, link below. Cool. I hate doing that plug. Let's get back to it. So before we bring our guest on, how many Freedom Eagles are you feeling recently? On a scale of Iran to Northrop Grumman, what's up?
I'm feeling about 2 Lockheed Martin Freedom Eagles because of the contracts they just were awarded. $226 million for the ATACMS. Let's give them a round of applause. And
HIMARS rocket artillery system, baby.
Hell yeah. And the $4.5 billion for the phased array tracking to intercept of target advanced capability 3 missile. So that just came through. So great day for the stock market, guys. It's all about what America's all about. Don't worry about your cost of living. Just be happy for Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, I'm really excited for them because even though it's July and Pride Month is over, they are still all about LGBTQ rights and safe working spaces. So that's cool. So yeah, I just, you know, sometimes around the holidays like this, I'll reflect on my military service. You know, what were we fighting and dying and sacrificing our youth for? What were other people just straight up dying for? Because they happened to be born in the wrong place at the wrong time. And, you know, I'm a little more introspective than like this veteran seen here getting stumped by a very simple question.
I've been all over the world fighting for your land.
Where are you fighting?
I'm fought in Afghanistan.
Where are my rights in Afghanistan?
Where are your rights in Afghanistan?
Yes.
Well, I mean, they weren't.
He repeated the question to delay, so you search around for an answer for that.
Literally, that was it looked like that was the first time he'd ever asked himself that question. So, all right. So let's really hone in on that. Like, what freedom and for who? Are you free? Are you about to become a whole lot less free? Are we an empire in decline? These are all rhetorical questions, but to help us really explore these self-evidently answered questions, we have Professor Butch Ware? It's Ware, right? Or is it Ware? Oh, okay. I think you're still muted. Sorry.
Where?
Okay.
Where?
Okay. Butch Ware. Okay. Academic, activist, author, artist, director for the Institute for the Study of Race, Religion, and Revolution, a PhD from UPenn in 2024. He's a tenured professor in history at the University of California, Santa Barbara, specialist on anti-imperial resistance and African-American, and Islamic history. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on.
It's an honor to be here, man. Despite the blood-soaked holiday, it's a good opportunity for us to collectively reflect on the current state of American empire, 248 years in after the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, and I was forced to read this in my early college year, but Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, what did he infamously predict? That like any empire, like capitalist society, has 250 years, and here we are. But there's other reasons it's falling aside from Adam Smith.
A little on the nose, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to do a 4th of July episode on here because I'm no longer in a place, again, politically or morally, where I can celebrate it, even ironically. Because I did a semi-ironic celebration phase in my late 20s. Can't do that anymore. And I reached out to you after I saw your video about the Supreme Court ruling, where it was decided, essentially, even though the language is still kind of vague and it's going to go through more review, that the president can't be held legally accountable while performing official acts. And just to show the audience, like, we'll link your social media profile in the description, but this is how I got in touch with you, this video. And I was like, that's exactly right.
Pearl clutching regarding the Supreme Court decision to create a new kind of kingship in America is really sending me. Y'all really need to grow up. There was never any kind of convention of democracy that these people were not willing to break in order to preserve white supremacy, because the whole structure of American democracy was designed in the first place to preserve white supremacy. So there was no rule that they were ever going to apply that was going to cause them to give up political advantage when it was under serious threat. It's been clear for some time that American empire is doomed to death. The only question is, would the United States of America as a polity survive the collapse of its empire? And all indications politically right now are that it will not. Y'all really need to grow up and stop believing in fairy tales.
Yep. 4th of July, a great time to talk about it. So I think that's the kind of theme we're going to go with for the next 50 minutes. Is the empire in decline? Obviously. Will we survive as a polity? And what is the history? What are the origins of this country? And is its inevitable downfall predicted in those foundations? So
let's start with the topic that that sparked the video, right? The Supreme Court, essentially saying that a president is above the law and cannot be held accountable for official acts. This is obviously, a kind of patent rejection of the basic formula of the rule of law in the United States of America. And not the least bit surprised that they were willing to take this move, because as I said in the video, the institutions, the formal mechanisms of democracy in the United States of America were always designed to preserve privilege, to safeguard privilege for a specific group of people. And they were always willing to bend or outright break the rules that they had imposed on themselves when it came to preserving those interests in the face of a threat. So you see this coded into all of our foundational institutions, right? Why do we have an electoral college rather than a direct popular vote? In order to preserve slaveholding interests in the South. Why did the South get to count 3/5 of their enslaved population for the purposes of representation, when we all know that the enslaved people could not vote any more than cattle or sheep or other possessions in the United States, in slaveholding states in that time? So the idea that somehow any of these institutions are actually sacrosanct when it comes to preserving the power of the ruling class, that's a bedtime story, y'all. That is like, nationalist mythology that has been, fed to us since we were children. It was never true. And the thing is that Black people, indigenous people, have always understood this, have always known this. It's just that as the empire is collapsing, the imperial repression that it has always exercised against racial others, ethnic others, national others is going to increasingly start to be turned against even the white population inside its walls. So this is a very, very consistent pattern that repressive imperialism, as it goes into a state of decline, is going to start to become more and more brutal fascism here. But this has always been naked. So, like, for example, we're here, on the 4th of July, right? Frederick Douglass in 1852 said, "What to the American Negro is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all the other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour." And as it was true in 1852, it rings true in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, there's no greater example of this this hypocrisy than what we're seeing play out in Palestine right now. We see it like our empire literally cannibalizing our own neoliberal institutions, which we use to project Western hegemony throughout the globe, like the ICC, the ICJ, all of these, the idea, the soft power idea that the West is the arbiter and the upholder of democracy and international law and human rights. And then we have this conflict where all of it is sacrificed at the altar of, our colony, essentially. And we're willing to just go down with a sinking ship because... Well.
And I made a similar point, both with the ICC and the ICJ, rulings, which was just a relatively straightforward one, which is not to put your hopes in these colonizer institutions to be able to resolve any kind of, settler colonial violence, because essentially these institutions were framed by us in order to divvy up the spoils, right, between colonizers, to prevent tete-a-tetes between colonial forces. Basically, this is to facilitate the hospitable extraction of colonized resources without too much clash between colonial powers. And you see very much the blue and the red team in the United States of America right now functioning in a similar role. We really ultimately have a one-party system right now. It's just that the blue team has a different set of corporate sponsors than the red team. And there's a significant amount of overlap when it comes actually to the war machine and when it comes to AIPAC. So all of these institutions right now seem to give us like these this veneer of having choices, of having representation, of having democracy, of having these institutions held accountable. But in the end, like I said from the top, there is no rule that they will not break when it comes to preserving privilege. And that's why you saw, oh yeah, well, we should let Israel investigate itself for war crimes, and they should promise not to do it anymore, and they should definitely stop. And of course, they definitely escalated, because these were never institutions that were designed to have teeth in reining in imperialist excess.
The professor, I have in reference to what you're talking about, creating this veneer of options. I was digging into the Project 2025, and I wanted to run something past you. So I was doing some research into the Heritage Foundation and its relationship with, say, BlackRock. What's interesting is that there's been a culture war going on between the Heritage Foundation, which tries to portray itself as being like this grassroots, individual liberty, America freedom, that kind of thing, right? And then it's been at this culture war with BlackRock's ESG score, which, in my opinion, the ESG score is like the bone that corporate capitalism is giving to liberals to kind of pacify them while they commit all the other atrocious things around the world. So it's like, look, we're going to reward a company for going paperless while we're upholding, you know, child slavery in the Congo, digging up minerals and tearing into the earth. So it's this bone that corporate America feeds to liberals, right? But
Yep.
this interesting public display of rivalry between the Heritage Foundation and BlackRock is so interesting to me, because the Heritage Foundation is also promoting global war on terror initiatives that bolster the industrial war machine, which BlackRock receives all the profits from. So it's this interesting dual play they're doing. They're pretending that, hey, we're against each other in these little cultural matters like the environment and diversity in the workplace. But we're gaining so much more money by cooperating in the national security sphere and the military industrial complex. But I wasn't sure, did you kind of see that going on between the heritage, like, or at least in general, like the conservatives versus the liberals, quote unquote?
Yeah.
In this little.
It's a beautiful question, right? I became a historian of Africa in large part because I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 15 years old. It blew my mind. It made me want to study African history. It made me want to resist. It made me want to learn about my own past and my own culture. So here's one of the things that Malcolm said about the distinction between liberals and conservatives. He said that the liberal is the fox and a conservative is the wolf. He said this in a bunch of different ways, but I'll synthesize his basic argument is that they differ only in the modality of their hunt. It's only a difference in their hunting technique. And he often said that the conservative was preferable because at least you saw the attack coming, whereas the fox hunts through guile and through cunning, through posing as the friend of the Negro, as he put it, and instead, you know, simply consuming you. So they both want power. That's all it comes down to is power, naked power, nothing else. Okay, and there are, as I said before, there are going to be like small differences in terms of, you know, who has the corporate sponsorship of which, you know, party, but the overlapping kind of Venn diagram of white supremacist American imperialist power has the war machine, the military industrial complex, as Eisenhower called it, smack dab in the middle, and it has AIPAC sitting in the middle of that as well. So it's not, you know, a surprise that you see under, you know, Biden regime and in a bunch of democratic cities, you see fascist cops coming out and cracking the heads of students, clearing encampments, arresting people on spurious charges, sitting on the sidelines while Zionist thugs pound the crap out of kids at UCLA down the road for me. That is not a surprise if you understand that the neoliberal corporate blue party and the red party are just different factions within the same elite power structure.
Right. And, you know, the liberal elite will always choose fascism over democracy because fascism serves the interests of capital better than the messy democracies. So I know you, did you watch the debate Thursday night?
You know, I didn't watch that damn debate.
Okay. All right. I just wanted.
Let me be fair. I made a post about it before it happened. I was like, if you want to take stock of the collapse of democracy, feel free to tune into that debate. But then I also went a little bit further, and sorry to jump in before your question, which is that democracy has always been fraught, right? I mean, the one Western institution that they hearken back to is Athens. Athens was an ethno-state, okay? Only ethnic nationals were allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to vote, only property people. So democracy has always had these fascistic tendencies within it. And if you wanted to watch, you know, the latest in fascist imperialist democratic theater, tune into the debate. So I saw highlights the next day, but I ain't watched that thing.
Okay. I just wanted to let you know in case you missed it. It's to your point, really. Both
tell
Biden,
about the golf carts.
Okay, well, it was embarrassing, but they were both a Republican and a Democrat president. They had both been president at the same time. They were competing over how many cops they had put on the street. So, so it's just like, okay, cool. We know all about how you know, cops are basically been on the wrong side of every labor struggle.
Well, that,
you know,
I think the other main tenet of that, or one of the biggest deals about the debate, is that they were competing over their xenophobia of immigration. That was the other thing about it. They were trying to have this competition about who can get poor people to hate other poor people the most, you know? So they're basically pitting, you know, the peasant class, which is us, and this fear of immigration coming up here and being a leech on our system. And they would always use black people in the reference to talk about black jobs being taken by immigrants, which was the most that's why we were asking each other, what the hell are black jobs? So but that was, to me, that was the most glaring characteristic of the debate. It was,
if you ask those two, is picking cotton. All right, so let's knock out these points. Let's knock out these points consecutively. First, the police, and then immigration, and I'll try to connect the two. So I did a spot for Al Jazeera about 2 weeks ago, talking about the history of policing. And essentially, historians are in basic agreement that policing in America comes from three basic cradles. The first is slave militias and runaway patrol in the South. The second is essentially the policing of Indian country and the westward expansion of the United States. And the third is strike-breaking units in northeastern cities. Exactly. So everything is there, right? You've got imperial expansion, racial domination, and also class warfare. So police come into being in order to essentially police three things: stolen people, stolen land, and stolen labor. And this is another one of those fairy tales that we tell ourselves, that police are there to protect and serve, and that they're there to stop crime. Police don't stop crime. You know, at best, they show up after it's happened and laugh when you ask if you're going to get any of your stuff back after it was stolen, right? That is not their function, and that has never been their purpose. Their purpose has always been to police these three fundamental frontiers. And there's always been a dialectic relationship between that imperial expansion and the way that violence is executed inside the state. So people talk now about how, you know, U.S. police forces are trained in Israel. Listen, American cops were racist murderers before there was an Israel, right? This is just the latest iteration of a dialectic between imperialist violence and violence at home. And that has always been something that both parties, the right and the left, because it's, you know, they've changed sides at different points in time, Democrats and Republicans, but the right and the left have always been committed to that approach, right? Class control, imperialist violence, and racial domination. Which brings us to immigration. I mentioned in that spot that it's quite literally the same corporations that cash in on all of these exercises, right? So if you read Angela Davis's excellent work, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, where she talks about the relationship between the carceral state at home and abroad, she points out that G4S, one of the three largest corporations in the world, is responsible for building a majority of the private prisons in the United States. They also build the border walls at the southern border. They also build the apartheid wall and the checkpoints in Israel. There are massive corporate structures that cash in on all of these borders and conflicts, and the fundamental dynamics of them have not changed. It's about policing dangerous frontiers where the heathens and the brown people and the yellow people are going to pollute the American populace. Go ahead. I see you nodding, Greg. Jump in, please, because you know, Professor, I'm used to getting 75 minutes to lecture at undergraduates. You got to.
Oh, good.
Okay. No, it's all good. I often talk about the theory of the Imperial Boomerang, where mechanisms of colonial control are through imperial feedback visited upon the citizens of empire. Because on a very basic level, as the ruling class, if you field test something overseas and it works at quelling dissent, why wouldn't you do the same thing here? So that's why we're seeing L-bit systems, which is used to enforce occupation and apartheid on Palestinians, be put up to spy on indigenous American reservations. So Yeah.
And I'm old enough to remember when, when South Africa served as the laboratory for a lot of those same policing techniques and violence, and things that were used in Sharpsville and Soweto were then advertised as being battle tested, when they were transferred to this apartheid state, later on. Augustin Vollmer, who was the chief of police in Berkeley, right, had served in the U.S. occupation of the Philippines, and quite explicitly wanted to bring those techniques of repression, of counterinsurgency, into the way that he policed Black communities. He ends up lecturing at Berkeley. He becomes one of the principal practitioners and theorists of an increasingly militarized imperial police force. And then if you want to just really dig into it, SWAT teams, right? SWAT teams come out of counterinsurgency in Southeast Asia. Then the same techniques that are being used to control uprising populations in Southeast Asia are then turned loose on the Panthers, or turned loose on Black communities. And you see this heavy militarization, growing up in the 80s. So there's always been this relationship between imperial violence and, as you call it quite aptly, this imperial boomerang. It's going to come back and be visited upon you. And the issue is that white supremacy allowed Americans for a long time, white Americans, to say, oh, well, that's just to stop crime, because, there's a lot of crime in Black neighborhoods and crack is a problem. Never mind that the CIA is the one dealing it. Right?
Yeah. We won't talk about that one.
We won't even get into funding imperial wars through like poisoning an entire generation of a community, right? And then locking them up, and have Biden writing the legislation, Clinton, imposing it. These are all bipartisan efforts, right?
Yeah.
These are bipartisan blue and red efforts to demonize Black and brown people. Biden's locked up more kids in cages at the border than Trump did.
Biden was he was also all about mandatory minimums, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's what we were talking about the debate. I was proposing the theory that Biden and Trump worked almost in tandem with each other. It's like Biden was the quarterback, or Trump was the quarterback, and Biden was the wide receiver. I mean, it just really appears that the Republicans and Democrats do this dance with each other.
Yeah.
What's that?
White supremacist alley-oop. I'll lob it, you dunk it.
Yeah.
So, but it comes across culturally like it's a rivalry, but the rivalry is this ballet dance that they do to accomplish white supremacist goals in a systematic way, while giving the appearance that there's a conflict or a fight for different views of opinions in Washington.
Personally, I have a hot take on that. I think the DNC and the movers and shakers of the Democratic Party are not too concerned about Biden losing, because if they lose, what do they get to do? They get to refocus the narrative on Trump. It's only about Trump. It's not about Israel. It's not about this continuing war of attrition that's going to end in a frozen conflict in Ukraine. It's just all about Trump. And that's simpler to control than all these messy things that are happening. We're trying to do a geopolitical shift to Taiwan. And so that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I mean, let's go back to the initial question. Will the United States survive as a polity the collapse of its empire? Because that is playing a very, very dangerous game, right? The Project 2025 and the far right's takeover of a bunch of core institutions, especially the Supreme Court, but other ones as well, is really actually designed to like facilitate the full-on imposition of a police state. And the Democrats, might regret. The Democrats might live to regret, playing this kind of game when there are no elections anymore, right? When even the veneer of competition is lost, and their faction of that 1%, which is always, kind of proceeded on the basis of a gentleman's agreement about how to divvy up the spoils. When one side decides, no, we've got our foot on your necks right now, and so we're just going to end it, right? And this happens over and over and over again, right? You know, when empires start to lose their capacity to extract resources from the periphery, they become increasingly brutal in the way that they control and domineer their domestic populations. And the far right in America shows every single sign of that. Like, my trenchant critique of the hypocrisy of the liberals is not meant in any way as an endorsement of the actual, well, you know, nationalist Christians or Nazis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Nazis.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this flashpoint, and like when we're asking like, will we survive as a polity? I just kind of want to take 2 minutes to define terms for some people, because I know there's a lot of people who still aren't even aware of what Project 2025 is, and it's a huge movement within the far right. And so we're just going to play a news clip where they actually talk about this. So it's good for contextualizing what terms we're working with right now.
Yep.
And this is something that hasn't been discussed a whole lot, so we're going to get into something called Project 2025. A leading conservative think tank is weighing in on what a second Trump presidency might look like.
This is from 2 days ago, so July 2nd.
Project 2025 includes a massive overhaul to the federal government as we know it. And this is not just rumor. This is all based on actual stated goals that Donald Trump has said over and over again for the past 3.5 years.
Trump promises an unabashedly imperial presidency, one that would turn the Justice Department against critics, deport millions of people in the U.S. illegally, slap 10% tariffs on thousands of products, fire perhaps tens of thousands of government staff deemed insufficiently loyal.
Now, the leader of the group, by way of the Heritage Foundation, is a guy by the name of Kevin Roberts. And this week, he was talking about the whole thing on Steve Bannon's podcast. And if you're watching, you're realizing that the guy you're about to see is not Steve Bannon, but former Virginia Congressman Dave Bratz. That's because Steve Bannon's in prison now. Roberts says he's predicting a, quote, new American revolution. But listen to what he had to say about what it would take to make that happen.
I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
You catch that? Will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Yep, I think that's a breaking story. He said the quiet part out loud 2 days ago. So,
but see, you notice how the Heritage Foundation, which is the original author and the incubation point of Project 2025, they try to portray themselves and they try to appeal to the grassroots right as being about liberty, right, and taking back the United States government from corruption. And what's funny is that they have always supported policies that gave more authoritarian power to the government, like the Patriot Act. Kevin Roberts, he was a huge proponent of the Patriot Act. How many, constitutional rights were essentially bulldozed with the Patriot Act? So it's this branding they're trying to do, that they stand for liberty and conservative values. Okay, conservative values, but to also attach that to liberties is insane. And they've been able to get away with it. But I'm kind of wondering if that's going to work anymore. You can't help the neocon, right? I get that.
It won't matter if they've already, staged the hostile takeover of all of the institutions, and if people on the so-called left are unwilling to actually fight back, right?
Yeah.
Here's the basic issue. Back to where we started. There's been this tension throughout American history between all of these, to a certain extent, carefully thought out mechanisms to try to keep monarchical power from, kind of reasserting itself, and white supremacy. And the thing is that as a Black man, north of age 40, I have learned in my life to never bet against white supremacy. Ever. So when these two competing pieces and narratives and elements of American history come into competition, I always bet on white supremacy. Remember back in 2016, a lot of people were saying Trump couldn't win. I was telling everybody that I knew that Trump absolutely could win without any question, because you will never go broke betting against white supremacy in America. And this is what the demonization of immigrants is about. You turn on Fox News and you see migrants committing, crimes. It's what the demonization of Black people is about, is that if you can tell white Americans that they should be fearful and hate these people over there, they will follow you anywhere into anything. They will give up every single right. They will vote against their economic interests. They will imprison themselves voluntarily if you give them an enemy that they can hate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's why the conversation about like institutions and even the conversation on the left about class consciousness misses the mark if you leave out the piece about white supremacy. Without tackling the kind of centerpiece of American history itself, then you have no capacity to struggle against the true enemy that you're facing. And as long as they are able to rally, support through all of these racialized tropes, then it is going to be very, very difficult for us to fight back, especially when we refuse to fight back in the terms in which we're being fought, along class lines, along racial lines.
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult things is like educating people about what's happening. And if we're going to talk about like the core of these problems, like structural problems, power problems, like being white supremacy, like even liberals, like even self-proclaimed coastal elite liberals who are supposed to be like open to everything, they can't hear it. They just shut down.
Yeah,
they don't like it. They don't like hearing white supremacy. They don't even like the term, right?
Yeah. So no, it's just a massive conundrum, because I know exactly what you're saying about, they will vote against their own interests and imprison themselves. My grandmother was German, had a lot of problematic ideas. So when we talk about the United States surviving as a polity, that's one of the biggest hurdles, I think. It's like they just said it out loud. It's like, unless the left resists, it will be bloodless. But like, how does the left organize? That's another thing I've been thinking about recently. Like, we're notoriously bad at it.
So there's kind of two fundamental questions that were kind of, on my heart and in my head, all morning. The second of them is the one that you just raised. So if I stray from it, bring me back to the distinction between organizing and mobilizing, as Kwame Ture, laid these out. Okay. But
got it.
Before we get to that part, this is the part that I think that many of us have not quite taken stock of, right? Our, quote unquote, our American institutions were designed in order to prevent the resurgency of monarchical power and to distribute, kind of power more laterally across, a capitalist elite, a white capitalist elite. I don't think that any of our institutions were ever prepared for global corporations in the 21st century. I just don't think that we have any appropriate responses to the capacity for control that multinational corporations have over our politics now. We need a new revolution, not in the way that psychopath was talking about, but like in the sense that like a bunch of Atlantic revolutions, in Senegal in the 1770s, I wrote about this in my first book. They overthrow kingship. They establish representative forms of democracy in the 1770s. They abolish the slave trade. The same thing happens in Haiti. Similar things happen with the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And the reason is that there's been a particular face of despotism which has been wringing profit out of humanity for centuries, and enough people who are trying to make an argument for a different kind of system are able to collectively act. that's in response to monarchy. We have no similar response to the rise of corporate power. Not even our so-called, socialist or communist responses have actually taken adequate stock of what corporate power constitutes and what capitalist power constitutes in this world in 2024. Chinese capital, which is, kind of somehow the violence of it is overlooked sometimes by people on the left, is not something that I can ignore, having lived in Africa for a long time and I'm watching Chinese imperialism act directly on a number of African societies, right? And this is because late capitalism and the structure of a corporate state functions differently than those monarchical states did. We need a different kind of resistance. So that's the first part, is that we have not sufficiently theorized the nature of the enemy that we currently face. Corporations control our governments, and we do not have adequate responses to that. That leads us on to the second point, and I managed to not forget what it was, which was about the difference between organizing and mobilizing. And Kwame Ture said this. He said that people mobilize around issues, but revolutionaries organize against systems. I'm going to repeat that. People get mobilized around issues, but revolutionaries organize against systems. And this is a fundamental problem of the social media space in which we first interacted, in the kind of place where I didn't have a social media account until George Floyd was murdered. And I made one that week, right? That it was a response to a particular moment and to help people get mobilized. But mobilization waxes and wanes. People's emotions get triggered by certain kind of events. What's going to happen when, when Netanyahu, I don't know who's recording this, but when Netanyahu gets assassinated by his own people, okay, and he's no longer the scapegoat, what's going to happen when the bombing stops and people just say, okay, well, yeah, you still have this massive occupation and oppression in Palestine, but you don't have a genocide taking place in Gaza? Will the collapse of the issue lead to a demobilization? Absolutely, it will. In our current state of affairs, because we watched this happen after the Floyd murder. It was incidents that caused people to get mobilized, but people didn't get organized to defeat systems. And right now, the Revolutionary Party, which includes people of color and working class people and the refuse of empire, we are not organized. And Malcolm, I'll finish with this, said that we are not outnumbered. We are out organized. We actually have the power. And this is why they need to keep sending pigs onto campuses and pigs into the streets, because they know that when we go out into the streets, we can literally topple regimes. This happened all throughout the Arab Spring. It's happening in Kenya right now. If we make ourselves ungovernable, the United States government will yield. But that takes organization.
Yeah, and time. And that's another factor.
So saying, going along those lines of, what's happening in Gaza right now, let's say that there's some type of, calm in the storm, or things die down. Like you said, they're hoping that we will demobilize and just be satisfied with that instead of addressing the root apartheid problem that goes beyond Gaza. Okay. And you bring up a good point. We need to start organizing against the system that led us here. What do you suggest? How do you suggest we do that? I've always thought that we need to create our own ecosystem. For one thing, we need to create alternatives to the current capitalist system we're doing, even if the government doesn't approve of it, or it's not a political thing we're hoping for. It's something that we could, using our creative minds, collective creative minds, create a parallel economy, things like that. Our own, just like the capitalist system has their celebrity elite class, we kind of have our celebrities in a sense, like great minds like yours. So I guess milking and fostering that ecosystem, that alternative ecosystem, and what else? How would we galvanize that? How would we put that on steroids?
This is really the set of questions that we're not asking, because our responses are mostly negative reactions. So I made a social media post that probably, I don't know, maybe 500,000 people saw it, This must have been probably in like November. Okay. And what I said was keep the pressure on them with a boycott. But a boycott is negative. It is the removal of a thing. If we want to actually create the world that we want to live in, then we need to be about construction rather than merely deconstruction. And that means
putting a replacement.
You need to actually give people an alternative. In West Africa, they say that the child of Adam will not release that which he is holding in his hand until he reaches for something better than it.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah. We have to dream. We have to have a dream to replace the nightmare.
And we actually need to like be in the active process of building the institutions that we want to inhabit. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned Malcolm's autobiography kind of, set me on the road to being like an activist and a thinker and a scholar. I also converted to Islam at the age of 15. So this became an important part of my spiritual life. And I give talks.
Which, if you don't mind, if I could talk to you about that later on.
Yeah,
towards the end.
Absolutely. Please do. I couldn't be happier than to discuss.
I want to give you a hypothesis and see how you rate it.
Sure.
But yeah.
So I gave a talk to a group in the Muslim community in Seattle not too long ago on this very topic, right? And they started a working group on the basis of these conversations, creating something that they called the Economic Underground Railroad. Right, which was about literally just canvassing the freedom-minded small businesses, those that had divested, pulled Israeli products off their shelf, not just Palestinian-owned businesses, right? Because it was a Palestinian store owner that called the police on George Floyd. Let's be blunt about that. But freedom-oriented businesses, and starting to thread those together so that we frequent one another. We actually have incredible resources in the way of capital, in the way of human beings already in our own hands, but we don't have organizational structures for connecting those. And all of the movements that I study historically in West African history, ones that rose up against the slave trade, that fought successfully against European occupation and imperialism, the first thing that they did was secure their own economic autonomy. Right? Yep. They farm before the school before the mosque. That's the order. That when they were building these, Muslim revolutionary communities, it always starts with your economic self-sufficiency first, because until you are in control of your own basic reproduction, you are at the whim of the powers that be. And that's where we find ourselves, right? We find ourselves in positions where, we don't grow our own food, we are beholden to people that would control us. And you saw this effectively with the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was corrupt in a bunch of different ways, theologically and morally at its core. And at the same time, the nation understood this. They started out looking for economic autonomy right from the beginning. And that's something that we can be working laterally for. And there's so many of us that are deeply committed to this kind of emancipatory vision that quite literally, if we simply linked the economic institutions that we already control, the cooperative movements in various places, the green farming initiatives in urban areas and rural areas, we would actually have a lot of the resources already at hand. This is organizing, not mobilizing.
And there's a societal trend going in that direction that was kind of established. It really started to rise up during COVID. And this is just all across the board within Americans of all different demographics. Yes. There's been this trend of gravitating towards being self-sufficient with your food, but we just never, like you said, if only we can connect that with resistance and struggle against the system, you have a closed loop you have something that's thriving. It's an organism at that point. So it's just a matter of connecting these groups.
And one of the things about this, I mean, Mark, this is such an important point, man. Like, I often think that this is the real reason why, the leaders of the Panthers were all, assassinated, and the Panthers were the most policed organization in American history. They did have the anti-imperial international dimension, but what they were really getting good at before COINTELPRO and the assassinations broke them down was talking to white working class communities.
Yep. Yep.
And starting to get, like Bobby Seale was a pro for this. You know, like there were a number of them that were
the
really,
White Panthers too, right? Was that birthed out of that
exactly.
collaboration?
And this is what the powers that be have always been afraid of, right? So if you look at somebody like Tim Wise, for example, does a great breakdown of the basic function of white supremacy in American history. It's to keep the working white poor from forging common cause with Black and Indigenous and brown people and struggling against the elites that rule over all of them. So white supremacy comes into being in order to give impoverished whites a stake in the system, an overseer class, a police class, right? That has the privileges of whiteness, that has a certain kind of status associated with it. But as this empire becomes increasingly repressive and just really naked in its extraction, right? The money is all going up. There isn't a working class anymore. There is no more middle class that you can strive to join. It's not just my hope. It is actually my belief that increasingly working class white folks are going to start to understand that the whole thing has been a scam, that the whole thing has been designed to pull resources away from them. And you see people resisting, but not knowing how to orient that resistance. So we need capacious, open, models that encourage people to understand, man, like we're all here for the same things. We all want peace. We all want security. We all want to raise our children, in safety. We don't want to go work for 15 hours a day and come home with nothing. And that there's a small group of people that are benefiting from the immiseration of all humanity. And if they don't come up off of some of what they're holding, off with their heads, the same way that they did, like we're very
Madam Guillotine.
We are very close to guillotine time.
This is kind of a controversial opinion that I have arguing with some of my friends who still live in New York. I'm kind of an accelerationist now. Like we're still getting fascism under Biden. But when it happens, I'd rather be in my mid 40s, like prime field commander age, because I don't want to be too old to not shred butts anymore. It's an old stupid bro military term, but
that's spoken like a true combat veteran, man. We're not gonna hold that against you.
Yeah, no, it's just I'd rather have it happen sooner rather than later in some ways.
Before our backs start hurting more, dude. So,
yeah,
it's starting to hurt getting out of bed now. I hope they get this thing going so we can.
But this idea of what a fitting day to talk about this, but this idea of open systems, of multiplied capacity, it would be tough from a revolutionary front because we don't really have we do have money, but we don't have the access to systems that can control capital. Just speaking from a logistics standpoint, this would be very difficult to do, especially because, we're kind of waking up now. A lot of people are waking up now, but we are already in the surveillance state. We are already in the police state. We already are beholden to these banks that control our capital, essentially. So I guess that's the huge conundrum.
Can creativity help us out of that?
For organizing and mobilizing. I'm going to tell you I still have contacts within certain communities. Signal, the app Signal, is completely breachable.
Of course it is. I've never put anything in those platforms because I never believed that they were anything other than surveillance mechanisms. So I want to go to Mark's question for a second, because I do think that this is important. I think that a lot, and I've said this in social media posts. I've said this in public, lectures. I just did a workshop in the Bay Area on Islam and anti-imperialism, right? So in addition to a lack of organization, we have a lack of imagination. And the reason is that all of our horizons of possibility, our very sensibilities as human beings, the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way that we understand who we are and our place in the world, all of these things have been provided to us by the Imperium. The Imperium has formed our tastes, our subjectivities, and our sensibilities, right? We would rather, to borrow a biblical and Quranic image, we would rather eat lentils and onions in bondage than have manna and quails in freedom. And it's because our tastes have been dictated to us by our oppressors so that we would internalize them. So you talked about the role of creativity and you asked about this. It's absolutely essential, right? And the role of Black artists in the long-term freedom struggle has always been crucial. The role of music, the role of performance art. This is fundamental in reshaping human imagination. It's one of the reasons why,
too. Engineering during the Underground Railroad. Engineering was at its finest when it came to coming up with ways to subvert the system. That was, and not too long after that, you had some of the best inventions which came about from slaves that had ran to their freedom because of the mind that they had the brain power they had to put into gaining their freedom and the creativity it took to get it.
This is the reason why I'm optimistic. Is that, and it's also the reason why I do focus on culture, is because I do think that when human beings' creativity and creative capacity is no longer shackled by white supremacist capitalism, then our ingenuity is more than capable of providing us with everything we need. Just imagine where humanity would be if the last 100 years of technological advances had actually gone to like eliminating toil and struggle from our lives instead of creating a little bit more profit for the wealthiest people among us, right? Yeah. We would already be in that space where the human being would be working 3 to 4 hours a day, and there's more than enough to go around. It's just that our creative energies have not been turned in that direction. So it is crucial that we have artists. It is crucial that we have creatives. It is crucial that we have thinkers. Imagination and organization are the two biggest obstacles that we have to overcome on the way to freedom. We literally cannot imagine our freedom right now because we are so tethered to these devices and to these structures and to these systems. But the reality is that all of our traditions, our sacred traditions, our secular traditions all tell us the same thing. All empires fall. Yep. Get ready for what comes after this one.
Yeah, I mean, like looking at the Roman Empire in decline, though, which I mean, it's not a tidy corollary. People try to make it a tidy corollary.
Yeah,
that it did have so much inertia behind it. It just lasted for freaking ever. So, but things are happening a lot faster now. I'm surprised by how quickly people have been educated about this Gaza situation. It's changed everything.
And I mean, let's just, I'm a historian. Let me just in 45 seconds or less, right? Just give a brief reminder of the history of white supremacist empire. Okay, so so Spain and Portugal, for a 100-year period are essentially able to dominate a significant portion of the globe through imperial efforts, these two tiny little, Iberian polities. Then the French, the Dutch, and the British get into the game in the 17th century. The Dutch have this, window where they open up onto the Indian Ocean and become this massive imperial power. And then that ends, right? The French have this, moment, and the Haitian Revolution ends, France's domination as an imperial power. They get, kind of a second life at the end of the 19th century with the colonization of Africa. In the 19th century, the British Isles, dominate the biggest empire in the history of the globe up to that point in time. And just like that, it was over. Just like that, it was over. And the United States has dominated the globe like no other power in human history since World War II. And that is over. It is already finished. It is done already. You've seen it coming apart for 20 plus years now. It's just that the people in power are still trying to wring every last bit of blood and profit from it that they can. But it's already
screaming as they're going down.
Clawing, taking eyes out.
Yeah, and it's an extinction burst. It's kind of like, you know, when a kid has to learn a new behavior, they keep trying the same thing that they got the reward, and they keep doing it more violently, having a bigger temper tantrum, becoming more violent until they're like, okay, it's done.
So I'll let you be the pessimist, Greg, and I'm going to be the optimist just for a quick second. I think that Zionism is experiencing exactly that extinction burst in this moment. I don't think that the Zionist entity is ever going to recover from what's happening right now. I think that it is going to collapse absolutely and utterly. And the only factor that will, there are two factors that will inform the rate of that collapse. The first and most important of those is the continued armed resistance to the Zionist, entity. And then the second of those is our internal resistance in the United States of America. Because everyone knows that if we pull the plug on the weapons, you can count the days. Yeah, it's not a matter of weeks. It's not a matter of months. It is literally, quite literally, a matter of days before the Zionist entity collapses, and all of those murderous settlers are scrambling for boats and are scrambling for planes, and only anti-Zionists are staying behind. Only people that are willing to live in a place where everybody has the same legal rights are going to be able to stay. So I do think that the Zionist entity is in an extinction burst. The question is the United States of America also in an extinction burst? And go ahead.
No, I think in terms of U.S. foreign policy, it definitely is, or at least we're getting close to it, because our proxy, because after the global war on terror, we didn't want to do any direct conflicts anymore because it became politically and economically unviable. So we've transitioned to proxy wars. We've got the Ukraine thing going on. We want to fight the Houthis, but we don't want to put boots on the ground and do a campaign of mountain warfare in the peninsula. And now we're doing this geopolitical shift to East Asia to try to isolate China, build up Taiwan, and that's not going to work either. It's like these old foreign policy, and then you have like war hawks like Lindsey Graham saying like, "Oh, bomb Iran." The only solution people have is containment, economic sanctions, which is a form of hard power, which didn't work for Russia. The World Bank just today upgraded Russia to a high income economy. So the sanctions didn't work. We've used sanctions to control people, other countries for decades now. Those don't work. Our proxy wars aren't working.
They don't do anything except make poorest people in that society suffer. Continue.
Yeah. And so all of these mechanisms of control aren't working, but we're continuing to double down on them regardless. And yeah, it's going to be another extinction burst. 100%.
So we're in fundamental agreement that the mechanisms of imperial domination that the United States has been able to deploy, that those are in an extinction burst, in a rapid, steep, fundamental decline. What was I'm a little older than y'all, but you might remember this. I've fallen and I can't get up, right? That's where they are. And that takes us to the question of what will happen to the United States as a polity, right? And this is where the Supreme Court decisions, this is where the rise of I don't like calling it fascism, because I don't think that fascism does justice, right? Fascism is this category that comes in as an analytic to talk about the way that right-wing ethno-states function in Europe in the 19-teens, 20s, and 1930s, right? But the thing is that we had fascism here in the United States of America before there was such a word as fascism, right? Yeah. We had an ethnically dominated, state that had formal mechanisms of democracy, but didn't extend them to the people that weren't part of the ethno state. So fascism doesn't quite capture the term. It's really just a return to the point of origin, right? It is a return to explicit, violent white supremacist control. That's what it is. So we have that now taking place. And my fundamental question is, will those clashes lead to another kind of internal collapse in the United States of America that is akin to the last kind of major collapse, which was the American Civil War. And I don't know. Historians are really bad at like prognosticating future events. But all of the kind of elements and components that led to that kind of scale of conflict in previous ages, those are all present. Those are all present right now. And so where things go, you know, depends, like in to a certain extent, that you know, white supremacist sociopath that was on, you know, saying that like it'll be bloodless if the left allows it to be. That's not an inaccurate. That's not an inaccurate read. Like the truth of the matter is that if they seek to impose that kind of boot on people's necks, they know to expect. They know to expect violent resistance in return. People are not going to take that language.
Didn't you also read that as a dog whistle when he said that to kind of like the militant right wing in the United States? Because, you know, you got your libertarians, right, with your guns, your pro-gun crowd, which is a very broad base. In that, you have extreme, you know, white supremacist group militants, and then you got your patriots who they kind of shift races sometimes, but sometimes they also expand to including everybody. And then you got your like grassroots patriots who don't really have elements of racism other than maybe like some Christian conservative language, sort of. But I mean, no, I'm not negating that there's racism in them, but you do have this. You have a spectrum, though. What I'm saying is, you have a spectrum of people who are anti-government. In that group, you have extreme racist apologists, and then you got people who are just for liberty, which include other minorities, right? So the question is, in that pie chart,
not everybody that they think is on their side is actually on their side. Is kind of what I hear you saying, Mark. A lot, you know, like
what I'm saying. If the most right wing of people see right through that and be like, wait a minute, this is just another trick to install more power into the government, and that they don't really care about me as a white person. They just want more power so that they can put their boot on our necks, and we're going to be next. There's a possibility that if they wake up to that enough, there'll be some resistance there, where it's not just going to be this landslide convincing of the public, even in the right wing. I don't know. It's just a question. It's a hypothetical. I don't know.
So you know, when I talk about terrorism and how it's used as a cudgel to just demonize everybody, it's not really it's a really fungible term, and it's basically just a racial slur at this point. I generally ask people when I talk to other veterans about this, it's like, so what do you think it takes to make someone actually become like a resistance fighter or an insurgent? Because it's a shitty life. Nobody wants to live that life, to die in a hole, bleeding out in pain. So yeah, all of these gun-toting far right-wing people can be like, yeah, we'll like fight in the Civil War, we'll fight and die. It's like, dude, no, you won't. Like 5% of you will actually show
Gravy
up.
Seals. Gravy Seals, we call.
Look at Jan 6. Like how many they thought, like the people involved thought they were.
That one. Did you say Gravy Seals? That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I've never heard that one. That's fantastic.
Yeah. It's Gravy Seals. I'm a Gravy Seal attached to Meal Team 6. So
I'm gonna get out there and fight. Don't you worry.
Happy 4th of July on that one. That's like, you know, salute the veterans. Now go ahead, continue.
Yeah, no, it's like look at January 6th. They thought they were caught up in a revolution. Like how many people do you think were willing to like die for that and fight and get shot and like actually go toe to toe with cops for that? So how many
of them could like run a block without getting doubled over? I mean,
so I don't know. People are talking about revolution, but in my experience, like, you know, conducting counterinsurgency operations, it's like most people don't actually want to do that. The amount people have to be pushed to actually get to that space, or heavily indoctrinated, because like I signed up for it to actually get into that space. is kind of extreme. So people can talk about like, yeah, the revolution happening, but there's also that. I don't think like people's rights have been taken away enough. They're not oppressed enough to actually be like, I have nothing else. I'm going to die violently now.
Slow boil the frog. It's been
there's when people ask me, you know, like, oh well, you know, you gotta vote blue because the red team is, you know, just gonna, bring fascism. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when the red guy, you know, killed, 50,000 civilians, you know, in broad daylight. You know, we all remember that, right? Like we all. I mean, like where do you think you're already there? Like Greg, you made this point earlier, like. Every dystopian world that novelists and artists have created, we're already in it. The panopticon is there. The Hunger Games are there. You know, when we find out that they actually have Soylent Green, you know, that Monsanto is actually, you know, we're none of us are going to be surprised, right?
Yeah.
So we're already, you know, like deep in the midst of a dystopian world. The issue is at what point will human beings in the United States of America decide that enough is enough? Like at what point do we get pushed? And this is why I say that, listen, yes, we know that the right wing is, you know, that they're genuine fascists and all those things, but the left has been incredibly complacent with Team Blue's white supremacist imperialism since the Clinton era. And it is oftentimes easier to organize resistance against an open enemy than against one that is operating through guile and through purchase and through co-optation, right? That part of what somebody like Trump facilitates is a clear-eyed assessment of what you're fighting against. And it's oftentimes easier to organize against that kind of figure than against Biden, because a lot of the people that we should be able to count on in these kinds of moments are saying silly shit to us right now, right? You know, like they're on some absolute nonsense, and they're still operating in this fantasy world. You know, they treat Obama as though he was like, you know, some kind of hero rather than like the exact same mass murderer that has always been in that office, except, you know, light brown version, right? So all of that is to say is that people talk about the genocide in Gaza, dramatizing the contradictions and the distinctions in imperialism. The return of Trump will do exactly that also.
Yeah.
The only question is, like, will we survive that process? But the problem is that we're already not surviving that process, right? Rents have gone up 80% in some areas just in the last 5 years. That we are being squeezed from every single angle. And I think that quite literally the rise of that kind of straightforward, easily legible authoritarianism might actually galvanize a more sane response than what we are currently seeing to Biden's genocide.
And that's why I'm getting more and more comfortable with the idea of acceleration. So, you know,
acceleration. Yeah.
So I'm totally cool with that. So yeah, of course, no one knows what's going to happen. I have a background in military analysis, and this entire conflict has like broken everything. Like I can appreciate, you know, like as a historian like you trying to make predictions, and you're kind of like working off of precedents. We do the same thing in intelligence analysis, and there's just like not a lot of precedents for the insanity that's going on.
Yeah. That's it. Sometimes precedent breaks down. There isn't a precedent for where you are. Yeah. God, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue. Yeah.
No, that's just what I was saying. Because like, okay, I mean, we're kind of at the end of our time. I got to hop off for another interview. But yeah, so basically, what we could definitely see: empire's in decline. It's up. It's our time. Will we just survive as a polity? What will this government look like? What will the next insane 4 years look like? I don't know, but it's the 4th of July, and hell yeah, I guess. I don't know, like what kind of close? Do you have any? You have any closing thoughts?
I'll throw in one final word, and we didn't get to Mark's question about Islam, so I'll finish with an Islamic precedent for this.
Okay.
There's a story that's told that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was sitting with his companions, and they all hear this loud clanking sound, and everybody jumps. Okay. Except for him, he stays perfectly still. And they ask him, what was that? And he said, 70 years ago, a stone was thrown into the deepest pit of hell, and it just now hit bottom. Okay. And nobody understood what he was talking about. So everybody dispersed, went about their business. They found that exactly that moment on the other side of the town, one of the hypocrites, one of the treacherous people that was communicating information to the enemy, that had been backstabbing the prophet throughout his whole life, he had died at exactly that moment. So that sound was the sound of his soul hitting the bottom of hell. And that's why the prophet didn't flinch. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because 76 years ago in 1948, a stone was thrown into the deepest pit of hell, and it's just now hitting bottom. That's Zionism. Okay. It was always doomed. It was always doomed. These settler colonial enterprises founded on bloodshed and violence are always doomed. An American empire was always doomed. An empire that is founded on the genocide of indigenous peoples, the theft of land, the enslavement of Africans, the quasi-enslavement of Chinese, laborers, the brutality against working class people to try to keep them from organizing. America was never going to survive as an empire. That stone is hitting bottom. Do not be startled when it makes a bunch of noise, right? Sit still, be clear-eyed about what's going on so that you can plan your next move. It's going to make a lot of noise, and it's going to clank, and it's going to clatter. But the truth of the matter is that empire was always doomed. Where's the Spanish Empire now? Where's the Roman Empire now? Where's Babylon now? They all fall away. And so those of us that are interested in living in a world that has freedom, we need to not get rattled when the stone makes a bunch of noise on the way down. We need to be planning and thinking in clear-eyed ways about how to build a better world in which to live.
Wow. That was excellent. Wow, that was a hell of a way to end. So thank you so much, Professor Butch Ware, for coming on and talking with us today. Would love to do it again. Also, I'm going to be transitioning over to what's happening in the DRC. So would love to hear your thoughts on Chinese imperialism sometime in the future. So
it's I'm at your service, man. Call anytime. I got you.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, I'd say happy 4th of July, but that's a freaking doozy. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week on Colonial Outcasts. Cheers, y'all. Have a good night.
Nice to meet you, Professor.
All right. Take care. Great to meet you, Mark.
You too. You as well, sir.